I had the idea of like sitting down and being like, more serious and everything. I'm sitting on the floor in the corner of my bedroom. Not the most comfortable place because my back is currently against a bookshelf, and as you can see, it's a very 1.5 centimeter thick wood. This is obviously a room I don't film many videos in, but it is my bedroom. This is my bed. But it is a room, obviously, I spend a lot of time in. Outside of the theatre room, which is obviously where most of my videos take place in. Why do they want to shoot it here? Why do they not want to be in the theatre room surrounded by movies and everything? Because this video isn't about that. It's not about me being a physical media channel. It's not about me talking about movies. To some degree, there's minor tidbits of relation. I mostly wanted to sit here because there's at least some surrounding elements that remind me of the things that, give light to my life, if you will. You've got art from a friend, some Polaroids of me with other friends, with loved ones. Above my head, actually, this whole shelf here is full of film books, including David Lynch books, and books by authors I'm friends with, including John Harrison and Emma Westwood and Alexandra Helen Nicholas, and right at the very end, my Lee Gambin collection. Because it's been, I don't know when I'm going to release this video, but at least as of recording, it's been a year since I last talked to Lee. And I wanted to reflect on this in a way because I feel a bit weird about it in a way. Recently, as of the end of March, I kind of stopped being in my period of grief. Every day since Lee had passed, and he passed in late May of 2024, I never stopped. Every single day I thought about him. And it got to a stage by March where suddenly I just kind of stopped. Like, I thought, maybe I've just been too busy. I haven't, it took me hours into a day before I would think about him. And of course, things like this are different for different people. I'll know people who will be thinking about him every single day till they pass, because that's how it goes. And not to say I'm forgetting that he's not there or whatever, but more of my, again, grief, my sadness towards it has subsided for the most part. I think realistically, part of me, I re-listened to the interview I'd filmed with him a couple of years ago. I hadn't really revisited it since. Obviously, when he passed, it was a big thing. That video got a lot of views because suddenly, people were looking up Lee's name, and I was one of the top hits, because I had spent an hour and a bit on a Zoom call with him, and we chatted, and it was great. And while I have peeves with the interview, mostly how I didn't have him on camera, for one thing, which he wouldn't have been anyway, but I didn't get to look at him on camera to react to how he was responding to what I was saying. And it's weird to talk like that with a person when you kind of want to understand what their body language is. But listening to it again, I was listening to it just at work, just in my lunch break. So I wasn't even watching it because I'm like, do I need to watch myself with a bad haircut and shitty headphones with a plain background? Like, do I need any of that really? It was a Thursday afternoon or something, family were home watching telly. It was an hour or so before Neighbours finale was meant to air, and we had to get it done before that happened. So, just listening to it allowed me to just listen to a conversation between me and him. I know I've spent the past year purchasing every single physical media release that he worked on in terms of essays, commentaries, interviews, what have you. And though I'm not done, because there are a few that are yet to be released, for the most part, of course, I am done. Even listening to those commentaries, even listening to them like immediately after his passing, even one of the day that everyone else found out, because I knew the day of, a lot of people found out the day after. It was a Friday night, and I was home listening to the Halloween 3 commentary track that he did for the Viavision release, and which I'd bought that day because, of course, I wanted to buy it in honor of him and whatever. And it was interesting because I was there, box of tissues in hand, knowing, look, I'm probably going to cry whilst listening to this, and it didn't affect me in that way, which I thought was interesting. And I think it was because it was just listening to him talk with such passion about something that it made me forget in a way, but it also didn't make me feel emotionally involved because I wasn't, it again wasn't a conversation, it was just him talking to, the ether about a movie, of course, a recorded commentary, an eventual minor interview with Joe Dante, of all people. But even since then, all the commentaries I've listened to, all the interviews I've listened to, I have not gotten any of that, any emotional reaction to it. It's always just been, I'm sitting here listening to someone talk passionately about a film, and I want to learn from what they're saying. It reminded me a lot of my university days of listening to a lecturer talk, that intentness on what they're saying rather than having a emotional reaction to what they're saying, but rather an intellectual reaction to what they're saying. I guess a rational, logical kind of point of view. And it wasn't until I listened to my interview with Lee that all these many months of just, again, I guess, grief, just suddenly subsided. It wasn't like a big wave, it wasn't like a big letting go, it was just a half an hour of just listening to him talk with me. And it was all I needed. I'm still sad that he's gone and shit still sucks. But I don't wake up every day to have 5 seconds of bliss before remembering. It just takes me hours now, and most of the time I can progress. And now, obviously, Lee, in the past year, hasn't been the only person that I've lost. A few months after his passing, my grandfather passed away of pancreatic cancer. And that was one where the perspective of, having lost Lee in such a harsh, immediate way gave me some perspective. I haven't needed to grieve my own grandfather's loss as much. Every day I would think of Lee, I'd immediately feel a bit of, shame in a way. Oh, shouldn't I feel bad that I'm not thinking about my, grandfather immediately? Or something like that. But even, that was another one where I thought of it more logically, that with my pa, I had a whole month from learning of his diagnosis to his passing. And a month isn't a long time, but it was enough time for me to experience what else I needed to get what I needed to out of the relationship. If there was any extra little things I wanted to know, if there's any little experiences I want to experience. And all of it was just the same that I had experienced before. Nothing, really changed, outside of the initial hospital visit and the second last hospital visit, because the last one I actually saw him, he was unconscious the whole time. He'd been unconscious for a few days by that stage, but the day before he went unconscious, I saw him one last time. And, those were just, you just look at an old man, someone who, sure, yeah, my grandfather, who I've known for over 25 years, and it's just, he's at his tail end of his life, and I had that, time to process that. And the time in between there was just at their house. Just me and my brother drove up there on a Friday, hung out with them for like 2 hours, and it was exactly the same as every other time I've seen them, you know? And that was just nice, you know? There was an end to it where even by the end of it I was, assuring my pa just to make sure that he didn't have to worry about me. I know he's got plenty of other family and grandkids and everything to be concerned about, shit, I'm not going to live to see them do this and accomplish this and whatever, and I haven't hit any parts of my life where I feel personally accomplished, which I don't feel bad about. I'm in my mid-20s. I've got a long fucking way to go, hopefully. And so I basically had to reassure him of that. Like, I just wanted to let him know that, no matter what I'm at in my life right now, I'm comfortable and I'm fine, and I'm where I need to be, and I'm working towards something bigger, and that'll happen when it happens. And of course, a few months later, joined the Cinemaniacs board, and I've got other opportunities happening, and it's interesting. But the thing with Pa was that I hadn't needed, outside of maybe a month or two after, there was still the grief there, but it never really affected me as much, because I had the time to prepare for it. Theoretically, I'd been doing that for years. I'd filmed a bunch of interviews with him and my nan back in 2017 and 2018. Like, I literally had that mindset when I was, just graduated high school. I was like, hey, shit, my grandparents are old. They might die soon. Maybe I should film some interviews. I've kind of been doing that for this year, and that had been a thing in my year 11, year 12, where I had been filming interviews with some teachers and friends of mine talking about what it's like to be like an adult and all this kind of stuff to help, I don't know, any person who might be in my age group get into that stage of life to kind of understand it more. And so I did the same thing with my grandparents. I talked about them when it comes to adulthood and understanding their life and their marriage and all that kind of stuff, at least within the first interview. And then the other 3 I did a year later was another one of the 2 of them, and then 2 individual ones. And the individual one with Pa was just him talking about his life for an hour. Like, what more do you need? It's just a nice thing that I have, and I have all this footage, and I was able to give this footage to my family so that they could have it as a way to remember him, not just as him talking, but also the sound of his voice, understanding his life and how he would talk about things. He didn't change his mannerisms because he was on a camera. There was occasional things where you'd look, like Nan would get cross at him for saying a particular thing, which was clearly we're on camera, you shouldn't be saying something like that. And it's just like, it's a mannerism, and I have that stuff captured, and that I appreciate that. And I appreciate more of the fact that I was able to have the same experience with Lee and having the interview with him. And I think to a degree that's why, when watching that interview again with Lee, that I was just able to have that, just to use it as a way to, unintentionally, I just wanted to listen to it all of a sudden. I'm like, well, it's on YouTube, I can fucking listen to it. So I'm going to do that. And I just skipped to a random part. And this is stuff we were talking about. I'm like, man, there's so much of that stuff I've learned now since he was mentioning people's names. I'm like, I know all those people. I'm friends with them on Facebook now. Like, I've learned so much since that interview. To the point that about a month before he died, I had the idea to do another one. I never mentioned it to him, but it was an idea of, like, that could be interesting. Like, I've learned so much since. We could do another, podcast of some kind, as he referred to it. I never refer to that show as a podcast. He was the first and so far only person to do so, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, he's not wrong, And so, cut to, that was October, the Pa passed, November, December, January. Cut to about 3 or 4 months later, and the third person I lose. And this is someone who a lot of people lost. Of course, this is David Lynch. And that was not a morning that I liked. It's never fun to wake up and hear that one of your favorite artists, if not one of your favorite filmmakers, has passed away, Something that I kind of had an inclination for a couple months earlier after hearing of his, emphysema diagnosis. But, what can I do? I'm a guy in Australia. I mean nothing to him. He has his own stuff. I have no relation to him outside of just being a fan of his art. But losing someone, even collectively, all the fans, family, friends of his, the collective grieving we all had was a weird way to kind of tail end this kind of almost year. And it's strange in a way. Because, of course, there are things there you just don't expect. Where with Lee, I almost a month before his passing, I went to the screening that he had at the Astor for Stay Tuned, which was his passion project of screening a bunch of TV shows, just random episodes that he had hand curated. And I got to experience several hours of that. And I really thank God I went, because that's one of those, I say thank God, yeah, I'm not even a religious person, but like it's one of those things where I'm very thankful that I went to that, because that was just I might go, we'll see how it goes, I've got work on the day, however it be, and I just happen to be working around the corner, thankfully. Thankfully. So, I went there, I watched a couple, 2 different episodes of a thing, came out, was able to see him for a bit, and then went back in and watched more because there was a break and whatever, and he was like, oh, I've got the Jeffersons on and all this, and I was like, oh, great. I thought he meant the Jetsons. He just meant the Jeffersons. So when the Jeffersons came, I'm like, this isn't the Jetsons. Okay. Yeah, and I still got to, watch a couple more episodes. When the Twin Peaks one came on, I was like, this isn't low quality, I'm happy to leave now, I've had a long day. So I left. But before that, I was able to run into him, and again, one of those hell of a good timing, had the chance to talk to him about Twin Peaks, about his whole event that he'd made, and how I was, proud that he was able to put this together, because he was concerned that people weren't enjoying it. Because, of course, whenever you're an artist, you're always concerned that people aren't enjoying your art. And I was happy to reassure him that I had really enjoyed it, because I had genuinely enjoyed it. I'd gotten to see an episode of The Addams Family I'd never seen. The Jeffersons thing I'd never seen. There was basically every single episode he screened I had never seen before, and the one time there was an episode I had seen was the Twin Peaks one. So I was like, I've seen this before, I'm happy to leave now. And thankfully I did. Sure, I could have stayed for a couple more hours. I don't regret not staying, because again, being there to see him, to chat right at the very end, and that being our last conversation, unexpected but nice, And we didn't even chat on Facebook after that. We didn't, not a single message was sent between the two of us up until he died. I liked a couple of his Facebook posts, he liked a couple of mine. That was about it for interactions. Because he had been too sick to be at any other Cinemaniacs events. And I think that's also why I wanted to see him, because I hadn't seen him since the King Kong screening. Which was the last time I got footage of him. And that's, again, when it came to, I had that, and the same thing with Paul. We had plenty of opportunities to see him throughout the year, and we did, and then, of course, we had the opportunities, we made the opportunities happen once he'd had his diagnosis, because it's like, well, we have at least a month, let's make the most of it. And I still got to see him 3 or 4 times before he passed. And that was nice. Sure, I could have seen him more, but it's it's not always fun to watch someone deteriorate very quickly. And I'm happy that the situations and the scenarios where I did get to see him were nice. The initial hospital visit, seeing him at his home, that last time at his home, and then the 2 subsequent hospital visits, the conscious and an unconscious one. Even when he was conscious, I rarely talked to him, because there were so many people there. It just happened to be one of the only days where everyone showed up. But I at least got to say goodbye to him, and he was thankful for me, for coming, and that was nice. So I was at least able to have that moment with him, And, those were those last words from him. So, appreciation is appreciation. And that's what I'm getting out of this experience, was an appreciation for these people. And even with, David Lynch, which is a weirder one in a way, because, again, not a person I knew personally, of course. A person whose art has influenced a lot of how I interact with art and people. I've made some great friendships because of his artwork, because of the fandom around his art. And even like a week prior to his passing, because the week prior I was in Tassie, and they had on the Criterion channel all the episodes of Dumbland, and I'm like, Lynch would hate this, but I'm going to watch this on my phone, because I didn't have a laptop. And my partner was just like, she was in the shower or whatever, and I'm like, look, she takes a while in the shower. I'm pretty sure I could bang out this whole entire season. This, like 35 minutes of videos that I'd never really fully watched before. I'd only watched like the first episode. I'm like, this is maybe not what I'm into. And then I watched the whole thing in one go, and I'm like, this is crazy. Lynch would hate that I'm watching this on a phone, but you know what? He made it for a website. Who knows? Who cares, And then a week and a half later, he was dead. And it's just like, well, that's, And even that was the Thursday night I was going to start my rewatch of Twin Peaks. I was really in the mood to start watching Twin Peaks again. I am actually thankful I didn't. I watched a different film, and then the next morning found out he passed, went to work, did all that shit, and then came home and was like, I'm going to rewatch the pilot of Twin Peaks. And I'm happy I did, because that was an episode that is grief. It's everyone grieving the loss of someone who was so important to them. Whether, and this of course being Laura Palmer, whether they were directly involved with her life, or they just knew of her, or she was such a bright spark and just a ball of energy in their town, in their own personal universe, that she meant so much just for her existing, that her loss affected everyone. And that, I'm like, that is exactly how I feel about Lynch's passing. Exactly that. Like, I'm one of the outskirts people, that didn't know her personally, or at least didn't know Lynch personally, I should say. I'm not talking about Laura, shouldn't be talking about Laura Palmer in that way. Didn't know Lynch personally. My only slight interaction was during a Twin Peaks fan thing back in Melbourne, back in, 2018, 2019? They had a Twin Peaks Talk of the Stars or something like that. I can't remember what it was called. And they had a bunch of the cast come to Australia. Oh no, they had like a world tour or some shit. Obviously it was the year or two after the return. And I think it was the year after the return. And they had it at the Palais Theatre, and they had cardboard cutouts of the characters, of one of which I bought, of course, Cooper, who now hangs in the theatre room. Well, I shouldn't say hang. He's stuck to the wall. He can't escape. And at the end of that, they had David Lynch call in, he FaceTimed in. And I answered some questions for the people who'd paid hundreds, if not $1,000, to ask him a question that he won't give them a good answer. My only annoyance with that is that they wouldn't let you record it, which really sucks. That would have been really nice, but you would have had everyone with their phones out, whatever. I would have just liked an audio recording of it just to hear what he said. But I remember it very distinctly. I remember seeing his face up on the screen. Like, you imagine if you watch any of his videos, the weather videos that he did, it was just that. It was just him in that room, just in his office, his studio, just with a camera there, just talking, listening to people ask questions and then giving the stupid answers. Yeah. Not really stupid answers. Some of them were nice. I think one of them, someone had asked about, I think one of the actors who was in Twin Peaks had passed like a few weeks earlier, and someone had asked about what the people in the world of Twin Peaks would have reacted, assuming that like it was concurrent with, if the actor dies, then the character dies kind of deal. And, he had a response to do with that. I think it was the actress who played, was it Peggy Lipton's character? Yeah. Because I think she had just passed earlier, a few weeks earlier or a few months earlier, and someone asked about that. Like, would, people be sad that, would she be dead in the actual world of Twin Peaks? And to a degree, he actually said yes, and that, it's a sad time there. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's an interesting way to stick to that. So a lot of Twin Peaks fans in particular, I think he's mentioned the same kind of thing before, even have that mentality that now, like Golden Cole has passed, in Twin Peaks, in that world. So, it's been a very strange year for all of that, to have lost three important figures in my life, from Lee being someone very recent, having known him for exactly 6 years. Like at that stage, it was exactly 6 years, which was insane. Maybe 6 years and a week. It was something as very simple as that. I think it was like the 18th of May that I'd met him, and he passed away on the 24th. I'm pretty sure he passed away on the 24th. I always get the dates wrong. There's a lot of things that happen in May. So it's just like, it's crazy to kind of think of that. Like within 6 years and a week, he was gone. From me meeting him to me developing a friendship with him, and then to him passing. And, even with, my grandfather, I say I had 25, it was by that stage, almost 26 years, given I had my 26th birthday about, almost a month, about 3 weeks after his passing, because he'd passed on the 2nd of October. And so I had, 25 years with him. Him being someone who raised me, took care of me and my brothers, of course, when, school holidays were around or whatever, or parents had to work, so the grandparents came down, or we would stay at Hillsville, where my grandparents used to live. And yeah, and I've had deliberate times where I've made the time to spend with them, when they had moved further down south. I spent 2 days with them, got the train all the way down, and my uncle actually picked me up and drove me to their place, and then I spent like a day and a bit with them, and then, went back. Actually, I think I spent a day at my uncle's work after that, but still, it was like, a 2-3 day thing, and, did my interviews with them and spent the time with them, and it was just nice, like, still within that, late teens kind of mentality of, I'm doing this because it's a smart thing to do now, just in case it can never happen again. And to be fair, pandemic happened like a year later or whatever, so that was not great. But at the same time, I'm also sitting there like, man, here are my grandparents doing crosswords, and I'm bored out of my mind, So it's like, there are occasions like that, bring a book kind of thing. So I've had relationships to some degree, of course, with all three of these people, and to have lost them all within a year has been really interesting. Neither fun nor, well, definitely not fun, but I've learnt from each one. Important things have happened since each one. I think maybe least of all with David Lynch, but at the same degree it did inspire me to really pull forward and rewatch all of his works. And to actually collect more of his works, especially from his songs as well. He's done so much music, it's crazy. With my pa passing, I've had more communication with my grandmother. We've just been more, I think, proactive about it to a degree. I even went to Tasmania, where my grandmother lives, where because my grandfather on my mother's side had passed back in 2011, so I, spent a couple of days with her as well, with my partner. So, like, I had that mentality of, I want to make sure I'm spending the right time with these people, because these people won't be around for much longer. So I've had that reflection of, hey, well, I've lost artists that I love, and I've had to cherish their works in different ways now. I've lost family that I've loved that has made me reappreciate the family that I have, which again is just that kind of thing when it comes to grief, when it comes to losing a loved one. It's one of those things that I'm not the kind of person who, if you lost someone or whatever, would be like, hug your, mother or whatever the crap. Like, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not in that kind of mentality where I'm going to suddenly change my whole life because someone dies. It's a natural part of life. It doesn't give me incentive to suddenly be like, I need to be more, I don't know, affectionate. I am who I am. I can't just suddenly change overnight. But at the same time, I can learn different things out of things. With Lee's passing, which I think in this case is realistically the most important and the most pivotal, I've met a lot more people because of it. A lot more has come of it. Just my whole friendship circle has hugely expanded from so many people discovering me and my works, as well as me discovering other people and their works. I've become a lot more friends. I've met a lot more people at the Cinemaniacs, both the board members in particular, who I'm now part of as well. Like that's a thing. But also just regular people who like to go, and we've all bonded over this element. A lot of us knew Lee, and some of us who didn't get to learn about him through us. And that's been really interesting. So, I've met people who work in particular industries to do with, physical media and movies and whatever, that I would not have met, at least as quickly, if not for Lee's passing, So I wouldn't, it's always hard to bring a positive out of a bad thing, but life obviously progresses and moves on, and if you don't take the opportunity for something like that, maybe there isn't any. But in this case, the opportunity kind of just fell on me. Like, hey, I've just lost this really important person, but this important person also happened to know all these other people, and all these other people happen to come to the place to congregate in respect of this one person. And because of that, and some of them even knew me just from just existing in general, like the Josh who runs Imprint. Like, he just knew of my videos. He'd seen me before, so when he came over to me, he knew who I was, and I had no idea who he was. And because of that, I've met him, and he knew Lee, and it was a thing. So, have opportunities since that come about? I don't know, I'm not that proactive. So, not really. But it's nice to know that I'm a thing, because after Lee's death was when I really realised how big of a face he was, He was always someone who I, as an immediacy, looked up to as someone who was immensely knowledgeable, immensely fun to be around, and just charismatic, and just, had a charm and a wit to himself. Something that is so unreplicatable, like no one is ever going to be the same that Lee was, and he was such a unique person for that. And so learning of his life further and understanding the people that he knew and realizing just how big of a person he was, even on the international scale, is kind of bewildering. Like, I'm just lucky to be in a particular part of town, where I happen to have these particular friends who, I met Lee in a goddamn basement of a bookstore kind of deal, It wasn't exactly a bookstore, but it was a comic book store, so technically. And it's not exactly a basement, but it was an underground floor. And because of that, my whole entire fucking life has changed, in a way I didn't expect, and you never do. And then it's like, it's like becoming best friends with a movie star, not knowing that turns out you were friends with Jimmy Stewart the whole time. Pfft, who would have known, So it's just that thing. Maybe probably a rock star is a better kind of analogy, but I don't know. But it's interesting to think about in a way. Anyway, I've taken up enough of your time, so thanks for watching. Just me spieling about this. But yeah, I think my benefit is the fact that currently, at least grief-wise, I'm in a good place, This could hit a lot harder when it comes to the exact year of Lee's passing. That's kind of why I'm filming this before that, and more of in commemoration of the last time I actually talked to him. But also just emphasizing the details of it's not just him that I've lost in this past year, it's also been, of course, my grandfather and David Lynch. So 3 people I've really respected and, loved and admired for a good portion of my life. I've been lucky to have had these relationships in a way. I mean, not really with David Lynch, but I've just been lucky to have had relationships form because of my love and interest of his work. Nevertheless, he's influenced me, and it's a disappointing thing to know that we'll never get anything more from him art-wise, but there is still so much to explore. Especially if you haven't seen every single thing that he's made in terms of like TV shows and films and even music. His music is insane. And his art and his books and everything. There's one of them's over there. I still haven't read it yet. Room to Dream. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's kind of crazy to think that a year ago life was just normal, you know, and me a year ago would not have thought that any of this would have happened. So yeah, I'm definitely in a more interesting spot in my life since it's all happened. You know, and from losing, you know, Lee, I've met so many wonderful people, and from losing my grandfather, it's come to make me respect and care more about, you know, my own more intimate family, as well as more people have been sympathetic towards me, of course, because of that, which I very much appreciate. And even losing David Lynch, seeing how many other like-minded people are around me, you know. They're always like-minded if we all like David Lynch's works. It's simple as that. Even if you don't like some of them, but you like others, you know, it's just a tossing and turning. It's always like that when it comes to artists, so yeah. Anyway, that's all. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys are doing alright with whatever life is throwing at you. Life is great. Anyway, I can't get up to move away, so I'm just going to end it here.